All right. Welcome all, my friends and esteemed colleague viewers, not students, but my fellow magical practitioners. Thank you for tuning in again. I really appreciate it. 71 or 72 now subscribers. I'm loving it. Loving it. Loving it. Grateful for every last one of you. Fuck, I thought that was like a patch of white hair, but it's just no skin. I mean, no hair. Anyways, what's going on? A few things I want to talk about. First, it's comment time. It's comment time. Let's go over to comments I received. I don't know the order, but one was I missed. Fuck, I can't remember. I'm gonna have to go and record the audio of me reading it, and I'll show you the. Hopefully, I can show you the comment as I'm reading it to you, so there's still visual. But I'll see if I can do that right now. All right, so hopefully I got this both at the same time here. Let's see if I can get both these up on the same comment. No, I can't. Okay, 15 hours ago was this one. This one was also 15 hours ago. I'll have to check YouTube, I guess, for it. But, so, three idiots. Ceremonial witchcraft. Can I share my testimony of leaving Christianity? Okay, that was one of the comments. And then there's this one, but this one is before. I didn't hear yours. Archons, deities, and how we are all not gods or goddesses, but we make up the one source of all. And so I got this. I didn't hear yours. This one is before the other one in my mail, as you can see. So, but for me, it feels like that's a reply. New reply on comment left. Anyways, I don't know, but in my assumption, it is can I share my testimony of Christianity? And then this, I didn't hear yours, would be referring to me leaving Christianity, I guess. So let's get out of this now, and we will go to the studio where I can potentially see it. Can I share my testimony 15 hours ago? That's not going to show me fuck all, is it? Okay. How do I get to that? I guess I'm in the wrong fucking shit. I can go to video. Sorry, everybody. I'm not trying to be a whatever, but alright, let's see where it is. Right here. So this video is probably doing. I know it says 22 views, but that's probably one of my best ones so far. Okay, so here, view more. So at this, you can see at the top here, where I'm shaking a little bit. Three idiots. Ceremonial witchcraft. Can I share my testimony of leaving Christianity? I wrote view 2 replies. Okay, so, and my reply to him is absolutely. You can send me audio or video or type it however you want to. And I can share it, play your video or audio, or just read what you wrote and share it. And that's pretty self-explanatory. So, and that goes for anybody. Anybody wants to share with me, whether it's their story of leaving whatever organized religion they were part of, or any story at all, by all means. If you have something cool you want to share with the rest of the group, the class, let me know. Now, after that, I wrote a little small essay here. As for me, in Canada where I am, Christianity isn't strong or persecuting anyone. I mean, there's a church on every corner, and of every different different denominations, but with so many different cultures and nationalities. I can't even say that word. That's fucked up. Coming and living every different nationality. Coming and living in Canada. How could they persecute witchcraft and ceremonial magic? And I'm not being. I'm not going to be naive about it. I know there is persecution of the art, the crafts, witchcraft, and both any other kind of magic. So I'm not saying that in a naive way, but with so many different cultures here and us having so much religious freedom, which, if you work a job and you say, I can't work today, and they say, why not? Well, because of my religious beliefs, then they normally have to honor that. That's how it is around here anyways. But anyways, My 4 kids are going to a Catholic school, not because it's my choice, but they're, wow. It's not my choice, but theirs, meaning their choice. Wow, that was fucked up. I can't even read my own shit. Okay, so my 4 kids are all going to a Catholic school, not because it's my choice, but it's their choice. Their friends from around our house go to those schools, and I allow them to choose their own beliefs and simply just let me know what they do believe in and see if I can help them. But I want to support their development and their whatever they believe in. So to be honest, I didn't have a huge falling out of a church um, as I stopped believing in what is taught in church on Sunday. So what I'm just saying there is I basically don't. Um, it's not that I had this big falling out or was part of a church and they kicked me out or whatever. It was just I don't necessarily think what's being taught on Sundays is what the message may have been behind it in previous lifetimes. Instead, I use many old books, both religious and myth, including the Old Testament, sometimes the Gospels, in my practice. And I have an altar set up in my temple room that is devoted to my spirituality and the elements, elementals, and planetary energies that are present within us at all times. And with these energies, we can manipulate and manifest within our reality. Alright, I'm back. So that was the comment, and I mean it. Anybody, and especially to 3 idiots. I wonder if that means like Thunder Wizard likes to talk about the 3 selves. Whatever. He just, I don't even want to get into it. But I'm going to get into it. I'm going to be talking about some shit, and I'm going to be talking about him. So if you like when I do that, stay tuned. If you don't like when I do that, well, turn it off now. But, you know, he gets into some things, and, you know, I was told and asked to not share any of comment or anything else of somebody specific. Telling about him saying something again about why he doesn't get involved with Western magic, and then why something about the intellect, and then talking about New Age being too intellectual and all this. So I turned on his 3 newest videos for 5 minutes each to see if I can see what the person was talking about, and I recorded 3 little moments, clips of just some stuff, and I might play that in a little bit. But I have a far greater message to give out today, and I have to use Jordan Peterson for this greater message, and it's the message of nihilism, people becoming nihilistic. What happens whenever your culture is no longer grounded in something? Okay, so we can debate if organized religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or any other far-reaching religion that is anchored in our minds, in our ancestors, or in our cultures, okay? Which, by the way, if you are practicing a old pagan, you know, spiritual whatever, as long as you believe in what you're doing, then you'll be all right. Where the problem lies, and where people get nihilistic, is whenever they have strong, let's say, Christian beliefs, and then they come to find out that, you know, through maybe they're doing something scientific, maybe they're going to university to be a doctor, or they are studying, you know, however, I don't know what study it would be, but whatever it is that it tells you how old the earth is, and then this starts clashing with what religion has taught you in the beginning of time and how God created the earth and all this, and then you start seeing proof of other things, and maybe you're a historian and you start seeing the fact that there hasn't actually been an historical Jesus Christ figure, but we do have Julius Caesar and some of the old not Sumerian, but we do with Sumerian and Mesopotamian. We have some of their documents that are way older than what Jesus would have been. So we have all these historic writings, and the Romans kept a lot of detail on a lot of things, and the Romans are using the Roman Catholic religion. So
you think in their old history they would have marked down, or at least cooked the books and, you know, wrote down that Jesus was a historical figure, but they haven't. So someone going to school with a strong religious programming sees this kind of proof, and then it fucks up their programming, and then they can potentially jump to another religion, let's say, and try to find salvation there. But something happens when you lose your programming of your religion. When you realize the thing that you believed in since you were a kid is no longer true, then you can't just jump to another religion, because you know in your head now that there's a good chance if you looked that that one wouldn't be true as well. It's kind of like as a child when they stop believing in you know who. Well, they look at their parents and say, okay, well, that must mean the Easter Bunny's not true, and there's no Tooth Fairy, and there's none of these. I'm whispering because my kids aren't far. But do you see, this is what happens, right? The mind looks for all the other programs that they have based on something similar, meaning the fat guy in a big red suit. If he's not real, well, then that bunny that brings me chocolates and the person that comes grabs my tooth for money is probably not real either. Same thing happens when you lose your programming for Christianity. And this can start nihilism. And what Peterson talks about is when this happened in history. This is when the Nazi Party came to power. This is when the Soviet Union had concentration camps and killed lots of people, trying to make all of it communist. Under Mao in China, same thing fucking happened. And this was the result of that. People stopped believing in God. I think it was Nietzsche proclaimed, God is dead. But what Carl Jung discovered and was trying to answer that question, he was trying to answer the question, what do we do when God dies? Because the result of that is nihilism. People don't have something to believe in. People, and the answer he came to was, we have to realize that we have to replace what we lost, but we can't make a new God, although you could. But you have to realize that we are a type of God. And I have Jordan Peterson on record actually even saying this. I even saying this much. And that's where we come in, the spiritual people trying to teach spiritual knowledge. So let me show you the Jordan Peterson thing first. All right, just before I start playing Peterson, I want to let everybody know it's about a 25-minute clip so far, but about every 2 minutes or so I come and chime in for about 2 to 5, sometimes 8 minutes long on a theory he just brought in, and it's mostly going to be circling the idea of belief systems, God, Carl Jung, sometimes a shadow side, sometimes how to become your own God and stuff like that. So just want to let people know that. So if they're not into that kind of thing when I do it, well, there you go, you got your warning. But that's how it's going to play out. I'm not going to play the whole 25 minutes of Peterson, and then I'm going to talk for another 25 or 40 minutes after that. It's going to be a little bit in between, and then with a conclusion for me at the end.
Rather, it is in one particular interpretation, the Christian moral one, that nihilism is rooted. The end of Christianity, at the hands of its own morality, which cannot be replaced, which turns against the Christian God. The sense of truthfulness, highly developed by Christianity, is nauseated by the falseness and mendaciousness of all Christian interpretations of the world and of history. It's a rebound from God is the truth to the fanatical faith all is false, an act of Buddhism. So it's a strange interpretation, because Nietzsche, although he was violently anti-Christian in his self-presentation to the public, was more like a, in my opinion, was more like a beneficial critic of the Western Christian tradition. And because the first thing he realized was that the domination of the West essentially by the Catholic Church for something like 1900 years was necessary in order for the European mind to become trained and focused. So his point was that unless you learn to place an interpretive scheme on the world and interpret that world in a coherent manner through that scheme, you don't have a trained mind. And for Nietzsche, in some sense, it didn't really matter what the interpretive scheme was. It was just that at some point you had to discipline yourself, and this would be something like a post-adolescent process. You had to discipline yourself by developing an adherence to some sort of coherent, deep, coherent view.
All right, so this first part, what he just said was, the way I interpret it was, when you come to the realization that you need whenever you realize that, Christianity, God has died and all that, science has proven that Christianity cannot be a factual book and all that. This is what happened and this is what brought things down. I forget if you think he's still talking about Nietzsche, but you have to be able to either take that book or any other spiritual religion and realize that there still is something to this realm that can't be proven by science, that is there, that is beyond us, whatever the case is. For my example, it's going back into my grandmother's lineage and finding out what her ancient witchcraft tradition and where her family came from, and what they may have done and all that. Not only that, but realizing the planetary powers, planetary energies, finding out the days of the week are named after the planets, because these powers are within us, within everything. They're instantiated in our culture. Excuse me. These 7 deities are in every culture, just with different names for a reason. So these things are powerful. These things are real. Okay. This is a belief I have, and I'm able to anchor myself into this reality with that, to not be nihilistic, to not be like, okay, well, there's no God, there's no Jesus. Yeah, okay, I am a God, but what the fuck does that mean? That means I'm all alone, and when I die, I just what, But I was able to find my spirituality throughout this. But you can do that within Christianity. This is one of these reasons why I say you can use the Bible to your benefit. You can take those stories and find truth and meaning and whatever, because it says right in the Bible that it's parables and metaphors meant to teach a lesson. So for everybody out there saying you can't take the Bible like that, yeah, you believe in it, you don't, go fuck yourself. Okay, that's nihilism. Well, if you believe in it, it's not nihilistic. If you stop believing it and you have nothing else to believe in, then you can become nihilistic. But this is a point I'm going to bring up later, but I just wanted to say something fast about it right there, that this is one of the main reasons I say that you can use the Bible in whatever tradition you're doing. It could be a spiritual, it could be witchcraft, it could be New Age, it doesn't matter. Find some meaning in that book and use it to your benefit. It doesn't matter the names, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. However you want to use it to your benefit.
And the consequence of that, at least in principle, could be that you could come to be the sort of person that would be respectful of the truth, and also someone who regarded truth as a moral virtue, as a higher order moral virtue. But then Nietzsche's point was that Christianity developed that sense in Europe to such a degree that the spirit of truth-seeking went after the axioms of Christianity and demolished them. That was his view of what happened during the Enlightenment as a consequence of the interaction between science and religion. So Nietzsche's view was that the modern mind, we'll say, because we're speaking 150 years later, the modern mind had been trained rigorously to interpret things through a coherent structure. And then once that training had occurred, then it could use any number of coherent structures, and then it could also use its ability to form a relationship with the truth, to criticize the very thing that gave rise to that mind. And that's Nietzsche's diagnosis of the 20th century individual. The pursuit of truth itself had undermined the structure that gave birth to the pursuit of truth. And that left people wide open. It left them wide open, on the one hand, to nihilism. And nihilism is the belief that nothing has meaning. Nothing has any final meaning. And the best way of expressing nihilism is, what the hell difference is it going to make in 1,000 years what we do today? Or in 100 years, for that matter. And it's a rational reduction of all of the experiences of life to rational insignificance. Nothing has any final meaning. And so the question, of course, that emerges from that is, well, why do anything? And a deeper question that emerges from that is, well, why bear suffering? But that's not the only problem from an existential point of view, because the existentialists, and Nietzsche as well, also believed that nihilism was actually unbearable. Because people suffer, they have to have a framework of meaning in which to place the suffering, because otherwise it undermines their ability to live. And people can't move forward in that condition. And so another one of Nietzsche's prognostications was that nihilism would produce its counterpart, which was totalitarianism, and people would leap from their immersion, say, in evolutionarily emergent systems of faith, and jump headlong into rational utopian constructions of reality. because people can't do without an interpretive framework. So it wasn't as if the consequence of moving beyond religion was going to be a step into enlightenment, which is what...
Alright, once again, another point I'm going to bring up later and talk about it more extensively, but just real fast right now, so I can come back and see what my points are that I need to talk about later. Shedding religious beliefs and getting away from your Christian beliefs or whatever the case is not going to leap you into a spiritual domain, a spiritual place, okay? And that's the danger of someone saying, get rid of the Bible, it's bad for you altogether. It's something that could hurt somebody when you get rid of those religious beliefs, those belief systems. It's a terrifying thing and it hurts, and that's why people attack people like Thunder Wizard over and over again, and you have to have something to replace it with. Now, if you're not willing to teach these people something, and I mean, he is, you have to pay for it, but he is, but sometimes people can't afford that, but hearing that every day will eventually program their mind that obviously Christianity isn't real. And if they don't have something else to fall on, it could be devastating and very hard, and they can become nihilistic and then lose them altogether. And it's not a smart way to go about it. You know, the better way to go about it is to teach, give them a better, don't shit on the Bible. Tell them there's use in the Bible, because there is. Some of those stories are very useful. Some of those stories are older stories retranslated in whoever wrote its version. But you give them the other deities, the other gods, the other meaning, what you believe in, what you think, and what you use to anchor yourself in this world. Then tell them there's certain things in the Bible that are toxic that you have to pull away from and understand intellectually, consciously, figure out the meaning of it and where the translations went wrong and what utility is in finding out the original translation and why it was changed into why magic's of the devil, or the love of money is really root of all evil, not money, and all these things. And once you get that in their head, then they can shift their programming rather than just shed away from that whole book, and then they become nihilistic and they don't have the money to pay for a program to learn their spirituality, and then they just go kill themselves because there's no reason to live. You know what I mean? And that's how it feels. It may not be that extreme, but that's how it feels to someone who loses those beliefs. Kind of like the kid just finds out about Christmas time. You know, they're pretty sad about that shit.
Materialist rationalists always presume, they presume if you could just shed the superstitious claptrap that's associated with your religious heritage, you'd instantly be enlightened. But Nietzsche's point was that is not what's likely to happen. What's likely to happen is two things. People will either give up on life completely and become cynical, prematurely cynical, which is certainly a disease of young people, and maybe it's always been a disease of young people, but it's certainly been a disease of young people since, say, the end of World War II. So they become nihilistic and not believe that anything has any meaning, and that undermines their ability to strive, or they'd fall prey to some sort of rigid ideology. And Nietzsche also understood that if people fell prey to a rigid ideology or several rigid ideologies, that the only plausible outcome of that would be like exceptionally intense warfare. And of course that's exactly what happened in the 20th century. Now Nietzsche also says this can't be reversed. Skepticism regarding morality is what is decisive. The end of the moral interpretation of the world, which no longer has any sanction after it has tried to escape into some beyond, leads to nihilism. All lacks meaning. And then he says, the untenability of one interpretation of the world, upon which a tremendous amount of energy has been lavished, awakens the suspicion that all interpretations of the world are false. So it's a brilliant observation, because his point is, I've seen this in fundamentalist Christians, for example, who I've taught in the past, because I have a very biological view of things. And these people, I met more of them when I was in the United States, they were more intelligent than they were wise, meaning the constraints within which their intellect was forced to operate, which would be the Christian fundamentalist constraints, were not sophisticated enough to encapsulate their intellect. They were too smart for their own theories. So they come to university and be exposed to ideas that were outside the scope, say, of Christian fundamentalism, would just blow their fundamentalist presuppositions into bits. And so then, of course, they fall into nothing.
All right, so there's my point right there. These people went to school and they were smart people, but they had their Christian beliefs above all, even though they were very intelligent, but they weren't wise. And whenever they got the proof that their Christian fundamental, their Christian beliefs were constructed upon, collapsed whenever they found the objective proof. And they were, they're more older now, because you get programmed as a child, and as a child, when you still believe in things like Santa Claus, it's a lot easier to believe in Jesus Christ and the Bible and all that. But then you get to an age where you don't believe in those anymore, but you still believe in God. Yet then you get the proof that the Bible is factual, it's infactual, it's not facts. And then it blows you out of the fucking water, and then you fall into nothingness. And that's the danger of coming out here and just telling everybody that Christianity is wrong, it's fake and all that. It's something that needs to be done. People need to understand that the Bible is an old book, it's important in our culture, and we still have it. It's still around for a reason, but it's not the truth. It's not fact. It's not a history book, but it still can be a deeply meaningful fucking book. And we have to treat people's minds with more care, than just trying to break it apart and be like, oh, it's for their own good. It's like, well, yeah, and if you want them to have to go to therapy for years and years and years, when there's a simpler and an easier way to do it without having to break them down and tell them that, well, you're just saying this because your mommy didn't love you. It's like, my mommy loved me just fine, bro. But you're trying to break apart my belief systems that were created when I was a child. And you're just trying to tear them apart in one swoosh. And then you're going to tell me it's because my parents didn't love me? Like, that makes a lot of sense there, T-Wiz. Come on. Are you a psychologist? No. Peterson is. So I'll take his word for it over yours.
But Nietzsche says it's even worse than that. It's not only that you fall into nothing, it's that once one of your systems of belief has been destroyed, you also learn that systems of beliefs themselves are unreliable. And so you can't just move easily from one to another, because it's like, well, you're in a boat and it's sunk, and now you know that if you jump to the next boat, that boat could also sink. So it's not only that your boat has sunk, it's now you know that all boats can sink. And so that's part of the position of the modern person, as far as Nietzsche was concerned, is that every one of us knows, at least in principle, that all the boats that we want to jump into could potentially sink.
All right. I love this, because as everybody knows, Jordan Peterson has done a whole series on the Bible, breaking down the Bible and telling people, trying to get people to realize why these stories are important in our culture, and trying to teach why, they're not necessarily truth or history bound or factual, but there are deeper meanings in this, and they're important to the psychology of every human being on the planet, at least in the Western world. But this is one of his earlier teachings. If you hit his oldest videos under his video playlist, this will be probably somewhere around 15 or 20 video. This is when he was teaching class at the University of Toronto. He's literally teaching a class right now. This is what he's teaching his students, which is amazing. But like you just said about the lifeboat metaphor, which is perfect. Whenever you break down this belief system, you think it's hard for you to pick up any other belief system. So trying to teach somebody your system after you just broke down the system that they were taught by organized religion that's been around for 1900 years, and you're trying to teach them a new spiritual system that they don't hear of, can you understand why that might be hard for them to want to just jump in and pay for a program from you when you're breaking down the programming that's been in their mind for that long? Do you see the problem there? There's a problem there. It makes it very hard. This is why it's easier to get them on board with beliefs that are similar to the beliefs they used to have in their head, or they still have in their head. You find the links and the comparisons, and you get them on board with that, and then you slowly tell them that, well, these stories and stories I'm teaching you, the ones from the Bible and the ones I'm teaching you now, are not much different. In fact, they have the same purpose. It's to teach us how to operate in the world. They're all archetypal, all part of our minds, because there's forces here that control us and rule us. The same ones that are in the Bible stories are the same ones that are within the Egyptian and the Greek myths and the Roman myths and the Norse myths and all this. These are all important stories. The problem lies is when we start teaching them as fact, and they program people to believe that it's fact. But this is why this is so important, because it's a good answer to why we have to become spiritual, why we have to know that we are creators, that we are part of the God, and we have inherent gifts as quote unquote a god ourselves, even though we're not the same as the God that people think. Whenever you say I'm a god, people think of a whole different thing. That's not what we're trying to teach you. At least that's not what I'm trying to teach you. But I do want people to understand how powerful they are. But if they become nihilistic because they drop the Christianity too fast, or any organized religion that they've been programmed by too fast, it could be more detrimental than good for their psyche, for everything. And I see it happening, and I see these teachers trying to teach, potentially trying to do good, but they're violating these people's minds to such a degree that it's going to be hard for these people to want to learn from them, or even pick up or jump into a new boat because their first boat already sank. So anyways, I'm going to be adding on to this idea as well later on. Just wanted to add that.
So Nietzsche saw nihilism as the inevitable consequence, the inevitable rational consequence of that realization. Now, I told you guys before, Nietzsche was a very, very influential person. He influenced Heidegger, and Heidegger influenced Binswanger and Boss, but Nietzsche also influenced Jung as much as Freud did, and Jung spent his whole career trying to solve the question that Nietzsche posed. One of the questions was, because we must experience nihilism before we can find out what value these values really had. So, the collapse of a belief system makes all the values within it no longer tenable. That's the meaning of Nietzsche's statement that God is dead. He said if you take the central axiom out of a system of belief, you can't hold on to all the things that were derived from that axiom. So here an example is this. So for example, in modern Western law, there's a presupposition, and the presupposition is that in some weird sense, everyone is equal before the law. And that's predicated on the idea that even applies to someone who's a murderer. If you're a murderer and it's known, you have to be treated with respect. You know, you have to be treated with respect by the legal system. And that's a very, very strange, it's a miracle that something like that ever emerged, because it's so unlikely. So then you might ask, well, what is the idea that everyone has worth before the law grounded in? Where does that idea come from? It comes from the idea of natural rights, that we have natural rights. And then you might ask, well, where do the idea of natural rights come from? Well, and then you're starting to move beyond the realm of rational philosophy, because natural rights, the idea of natural rights has been an idea that's been emerging for thousands and thousands of years. You know, it's grounded in Christianity, at least it's grounded in Christianity to the degree that one of the things that distinguishes Christianity is the idea that there's a universal faith, and that everyone, whether they're in that faith or not, has intrinsic value. And so natural rights are grounded in the idea of the intrinsic value of the soul. And then that's grounded in the idea that consciousness itself participates in creation, and say that's an idea that's embedded in Genesis and also in most creation stories. So when you get rid of the religious underpinnings, which ground the entire system in a kind of dreamlike mythology, when you get rid of that, there's no reason that what's left over rationally can survive.
All right, so what you heard him say right there, when you get rid of the religious underpinnings that give the soul intrinsic value, then it's hard for people to survive. And from there, he's going to go into the fact that when that's gone, people are in a nihilistic state, and then their leaders come along and throw out either extreme right or extreme left, or an extreme ideology. So these people they lose their religious beliefs. Okay, so something they were born with, embedded in their mind, it's been taken from them. Everybody else is on the same page. You know, if you still want to believe in Christianity, but you talk about it at work, and people are like, no, I don't believe in that. Did you not hear what happened? How they disproved that? Look like a fool, so you jump on the bandwagon, whatever the case is. And then all of a sudden, your government comes along with, this is what we're going to do. Communism, we're going to make everything fair. You know, in the case of the Russia, in Russia, a lot of it was under Stalin, or the one before Stalin, I can't remember his name, but a lot of the good farmers that had a little bit of money and they were doing well, all the farmers that weren't doing well were jealous. they killed all those fucking farmers, and then it was all the farmers that weren't doing well that took over. So food, obviously, shortages were happening and shit like that. But point is, people died. In Germany, Hitler comes along with this idea of a certain religion who's causing all the problems. They have all the fucking money. Kind of the same idea. Same thing in China. I can make the argument that today, this is kind of happening in the States with what we saw at the Capitol. There's a lot of people in truth communities, and a lot of the truth and conspiracy communities talk about Christianity, how the Vatican is really a satanic group, part of fucking these elites or Illuminatis and all this shit. There's a lot of people that see that and believe that right now, to this day. There's a lot of people that don't know much about that. And I'm not here to defend Christianity whatsoever. What I'm doing is defending or stating and proving the point that Peterson is saying. I'm trying to get that, and I think this is why Peterson did his whole Bible series. And it wasn't necessarily to make everybody a Christian, even though he is a practicing Christian, even though in this lecture you wouldn't be able to tell that. But, well, maybe not practicing, I don't know if he goes to church anymore, but he was a Christian, and he proclaimed it a few times, and he knows that a belief in a religious system, which is not necessarily, your faith isn't to the Catholic Church, but it's to your culture. Now, I rather my faith be in an older culture, a pagan, witchcraft kind of based, Norse, whatever you want to call it. One of the older ones that were closer to what our ancestors believed before Christianity came through and then, killed a fuckload of people and shit like that. But all that aside, the point he's getting at here is when you get rid of that, whenever people realize that, okay, we're not from this divine source, when they killed God, and this is the 19th century, so it's like the 20th century, which is the 1900s. So things aren't like they are today. But anyways, this happened then. People didn't know what to believe. They didn't think their soul had value. Science emerged and was able to disprove a lot of things that religion was saying were a fact. This is a science versus religion debate. Anyways, this comes through, and then all of a sudden, they come out with this ideology that's going to give them something to believe in, fight for your country, fight for your country, do this for your country, whatever the case was. People jumped on the bandwagon because it was something to believe in again, because they were down. And, if you are nihilistic, sad, depressed, and, because everything could be going great in your life, but for some reason, if you lose your spiritual or religious beliefs, it's like, well, then what is the point? What is the point? So even though I've said in many of my podcasts and I've went against Christianity and I've said all the things I've said about it, I'm here today saying that it is important to have this underbelly, this old structure. It is important to have a belief system. You don't need to be a believer to do magic. You can be an atheist who doesn't believe in a God and all that shit. You could be the opposite polarity. It doesn't matter. But believing in some type of faith is definitely important. Now, I forget where I was going to go with that though. But anyways, the way he speaks about it here was the words he used were so important that whenever you get rid of the religious underpinning, the structure, then people don't believe their soul is holy anymore. We don't think we're worth anything. You know what I mean? There's not, like I said in a few videos ago, when you get rid of somebody, when somebody stops believing that there's a divine judge, creator, God, father up there, and we realize that we are the ones actually creating this fucking thing, that's a scary thought, because then they don't know if someone does bad, if they're going to get, all the people that fucked them over, they might not go to hell. Now, there's a whole bunch of shit that comes out of the psychology when that happens. Anyways, I'm going to let Peterson keep going, because he's going to get a little further down, and I'll remember the point I was about to talk about a little bit better.
And you can see that if you look at what happened in the 20th century, because there were at least two major challenges to the civilizations that evolved, and they weren't only Christian or Jewish civilizations. The same thing happened in China. There was a replacement of these evolved moral systems that emerged over a tremendous amount of time that no one rationally created. Once people started to criticize them and to destroy the axioms on which they were built and move them aside, then there was a gaping hole left. And the hole was filled, well, it was filled most particularly either by Nazism, which, spread like mad throughout Central Europe, or by communism, which still possesses China. So, even though China came from from a historical culture that was substantially different from, say, that of Western Europe. Once rationality emerged to the point where it could be used as a critical force, which happened in Europe, that spread like mad, and it undermined the societies of China, just like it undermined the societies of the West. I mean, Russia, you can read this if you read Tolstoy, for example. In Tolstoy's Confessions, Russia was really the last country that underwent the transformations that were associated with the Enlightenment. So when Tolstoy was a young person in the late 19th century, he said he could literally remember when the announcement spread through his school that God was dead. Now, the Western Europeans had been working on that idea for a couple of hundred years, with the dawn of scientific thinking. But the Russians were very backwards in some sense, and they were never affected by the conflict between rationality and religion until it happened all at once. And it happened all at once at the end of the 19th century. And the consequence of that, it's complicated, but the consequence of that was that the monarchy exploded, and then the consequence of that was that the Russians were left with nothing. And the consequence of that was the Bolshevik Revolution. And then that was what started the entire Soviet nightmare. You see very frequently that when a society loses its grounding, say in its historical truths, that it turns to something as an alternative. You see the same thing happened in Quebec, because Quebec didn't undergo the modern transformation until the late 1950s. It was probably the last European society to go through the Enlightenment Revolution, because the Catholic Church was an incredibly dominant force in Catholic Quebec until the late 1950s. I mean, the average family size during that time must have been in the neighborhood of 10 children. And then all of a sudden, in the late 1950s, the Quebecers just lost their Catholicism. It was just gone. And now, for example, the Quebecois have the lowest marriage rate in the Western world, and one of the lowest reproduction rates as well. And there was a Gallup poll that was conducted. I heard about this must be 10 years ago now. I don't know if this information has ever been made public, but there was a Gallup poll that indicated that if you were a Catholic who had lost your faith, so you left the church, you were 10 times more likely to be a separatist. So you can see the consequence of it is that if one belief system disappears, well, nihilism is one possibility, but another possibility is that you just adopt the next thing that's close that gives you structure. And nationalism, of course, is one of those things. So Nietzsche diagnosed the disease, fundamentally. And then the psychoanalysts, like Jung in particular, they were trying to see, Nietzsche believed that if God died, because God died, people were going to have to take on the responsibility that was once God's, so to speak, as a personal problem. So, in Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche said, God is dead and we have killed him, and we'll never find enough water to wash away the blood. But he also said, in order for people to withstand that catastrophe, they would have to become gods themselves.
Oh shit, you just heard it. Let me play it one more time.
Nietzsche said, God is dead and we have killed him, and we'll never find enough water to wash away the blood. But he also said, in order for people to withstand that catastrophe, they would have to become gods themselves.
All right, so there it is. What the part I wanted to play, I think I have a little more recorded after that, but I'm going to play it just to see. I'll play it now and see if it's worth it, and if I don't have more Peterson coming back on, well then that'll be it, and then I'll move on to other things. But so God is dead, and now we have to become gods ourselves, meaning inherently to me, meaning understanding the inherent ability within us. Now everybody's different, everybody's built up with a different makeup, I heard Thunder Wizard recently say something like about Western magic being too intellectual, and talking about his spirituality. What if you could do a bunch of physical movements to unleash this power within us, which is one way maybe to do spirituality. In my practice, we do some physical movements in front of our altar to do certain things, to bind, banish, and to use our power and unlock it and whatever. That's what all the lesser banishings of the pentagram are. The middle pillar, we're moving our arms around, we're waving stuff on our altar, waving our hands around and burning stuff, you know. We do a lot of movements, but all that aside, there's different ways people learn and do things. But at the crux of it all, we all have a psyche. We all have a psyche that's been programmed as a child. We all have to figure out going forward if what we have in our head is going to be beneficial to us, or if we have to change it to suit what our conscious is going towards. So he likes I like using him as an example just because it's kind of like the opposite of what I teach, I guess. And I'm not saying his way is wrong. So his way is probably for a specific type of person. And this is why I try to say that why can't we both teach something that's different, that works for different types of people, right? I appeal to the people that are more in their head. He appeals to the more people that are more like him. So agree to disagree. You teach your way, I teach my way, but let's not bash each other like we're opponents. You know, that's my point. But anyways, point is we all have a psyche. We all been programmed. And if you have Christian programming and you're watching somebody who's telling you the Christian programming you got to leave, you got to get rid of, well, you're going to have this internal conflict until you decide what you want to do with that. If you decide that Christianity says that magic is of the devil, even though everybody is performing magic on a daily basis, everybody is manifesting their life, you are either blessing yourself or cursing yourself. That's the simplest way to put it. It's not even my way, it's Frederick Xavier's way. That's what he says. And taking on ceremonial magic, witchcraft, or any one of these spiritualities in different ways that I teach and other people that I promote teach is simply taking control of that. So instead of your magic being performed for you by you cursing yourselves, you know, you could turn that into blessing yourself. You can train your mind to think about the things that you want to happen, accept those thoughts, take the actions, do the rituals, and then things will manifest in your life. That's what I teach here. And it just so happens that I'm rewatching Jordan Peterson once again, going through, you know, whatever. Anyways, watching him again, and I come across this, and I've already watched this video, but I heard it, and it's like, this is profound, and I need to put this, and I need to talk about this. And then I had that comment that was not to be shared, not the one I shared, but another one, telling me about him bagging on magic again, Western magic, and saying about the intellect and blah 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 blah. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put these together, and I'm gonna make a video. I'm gonna prove a point, but instead of trying to just bag on him and prove him wrong again, which I have both Birch and Frederick Xavier explaining how Western magic and or witchcraft works, how magic works, and you know the things he said in the one video just didn't really make sense. He's saying how the emotions are the magic. It has nothing to do with the thoughts, and your intention, your intent is not your intellect, and it's your will, your intention, intending your will is your emotions. It's like, I can prove that wrong in seconds. But anyways, I'm not even gonna, we'll see. I still may do it, but at this moment I'm not doing that, because the point I want to put out here right now is for anybody out there who's having a hard time, or who's not positive if they have to get rid of their programming or whatever the case is. I'm here to tell you that, well, you still have to figure that out, but you don't have to get rid of your Christian programming. You just have to find out. You have to realize what's going on. If your Christian programming is stopping you from manifesting, well then, there's things you're going to need to do. But the only way you're going to find that out is if you do something. So you need to try one of the many ways to manifest, whether it's just simply writing a statement down, putting it in your pocket, reading it twice a day, in the morning and at night before you go to bed, whether it's making a sigil, whether it's getting candles for at least 21 days worth and writing something on that candle every day that you want to manifest. And then if you're able to manifest, well then you know your Christian programming isn't in the way. Therefore, you can start manifesting what the fuck you want. And I'm here to tell you that anybody telling you that if you got to get rid of Christian programming or all this shit before you can start manifesting, I was under that assumption too. I have videos stating that as well, that there's Christian programming that could stop you. So if you come from a straight up hardcore devout Catholic family, then yeah, you might have problems. But I wasn't super hardcore, right? Christian, I got the sacraments, all that. Still technically, I guess on paper, I'm a Roman Catholic, but it's not hurting me. It's not stopping me from manifesting what I want. And I'm telling you right now, I have performed many magics where I don't have to put even my emotion into it. If you think about sigil magic is using a sigil, and if you use the traditional way of the, at orgasm, you look at the sigil, you're putting emotion into it, but it's not the same way as we do in magic. So in magic, if you're doing a ritual for money and you want to conjure up loving feelings, you visualize yourself getting that money, and then you have to have a loving, intense emotion of love. The closer you get to the actual feeling you'll have when you get that money, then the better the magic will work. But for me, what I do is I just think of something that's happened in the past where it was a similar circumstance where I had those emotions, and I conjure up that feeling again. Or anyone that's similar to that, or have songs or music that put me in that loving, emotional, happy, teary-eyed state. And this way I have these emotions on command to add to my thought and my will. And then boom. But when you're using the sigil method, you have the most powerful energy, which is the sexual energy, and your emotion is one of lust, of passion, I guess to say, if that's an emotion. But it's not like you're directing that to that, you know what I mean? You're not doing it in the same ways where you feel it in the moment. So there's magics you can do that you don't even necessarily need to put the emotion into it, to be completely honest. And doing reject, banish, deny for your thoughts throughout the day is another way. I mean, it's better if you can put emotion to it. Say, no, I reject the thought that I'm never going to lose weight, and I'm so happy. And you conjure up a tear because you see yourself being as skinny as you want, or as built as you want, or whatever the case was. You know, you do that, it's going to happen faster. I accept that I am 150 pounds and I'm cut and ripped and I am so sexually magnetic right now. Will the harm-free some more to be? If you were to put emotion to that, it'll work, but you can just simply, every time you have a negative thought or a positive thought, I reject that thought to the negative one. I accept that one to the positive thought, and it will train your mind to stop having those thoughts, which stops things manifesting in your reality. But back to this, okay? This is what I just had to stop it here because this is like the main thing I wanted to show, that he literally says from these old, some are philosophers, but most of them are psychologists, psychiatrists, like Jung and Freud, you know what I mean? They're psychiatrists, psychologists, just like him. But these guys say the same thing. They work with human minds all the time. The human mind is where most of the magic comes from. I mean, the electricity and the emotions come from the heart, that's for sure. But everything starts in the mind. So anyways, I'm going to play the rest of this, see if there's anything useful, and then I'm going to come on and do my thing. And if I have time, I'll prove which is wrong again. But there's really no point at this point. He's never going to get it. He's never tried it, so he's never going to know. He's just going to keep bagging on something he's never fucking tried. It's like talking to, you know, once again, throwing pearls at swine. And it's probably best that he never does get it, because he's probably the type of guy that would abuse it if he did ever get that power. Clearly, he doesn't have as much power as he thinks he has, because his life would be completely different. But anyways, get back to Peterson.
Nietzsche said, God is dead and we have killed him, and we'll never find enough water to wash away the blood. But he also said, in order for people to withstand that catastrophe, they would have to become gods themselves. And, well, you can see how that might go wrong if you think about people like Stalin and Hitler. But the psychoanalysts also, like the psychoanalysts, especially Jung, and then Heidegger for his part, took that idea seriously. And Jung said, was trying to figure out, well, if we lose our historically conditioned values, we no longer believe in them, and if nihilism is the outcome on one hand and totalitarianism is the outcome on the other hand, what's left? And the Jungian idea was, well, the revelation of the self is that the individual could, not as a rational mind, but the individual as a totality, it's something that Rogers also believed, the individual as a totality would be capable of bringing forth genuine values as a consequence of self-exploration and honesty, something like that. And that's associated with the existential idea of individual responsibility. So one of the upshots of the Jungian theory is that to the degree you don't bear the responsibility for your own actions, to the degree that you avoid responsibility or shunt them off onto, say, totalitarian or ideological systems, so when you avoid responsibility for your own thought, because if you're the follower of an ideological system, you have avoided the responsibility of thinking for yourself. And the consequence of that was continual catastrophe as those pathological rational systems unfolded themselves.
All right, that's another uber important point. You should study Jung. You should definitely study Jung if you have the time. If you just started using the book, well, a great work of self-transformation or any other practice. I mean, I get it if you don't have the time, but studying Jung would definitely be beneficial. He gets into a lot of good things. I've read quite a few of Jung's books. You hear a lot about shadow work and New Age and your dark side and shadow side and, you know, all that shit. You really want to understand it, read some Jung. He was where, you know, Peterson likes to use a phrase that Jung said in one of his books. I don't know if it was Ion or one of the other ones, but the shadow of the human being reaches all the way down to hell. And Jung knew hell wasn't an actual place, but what he means and what he wanted people to understand by that was we have the capability within us to be an evil beast, the devil, the demons, whatever you want to call it. But we also have the capability to do the other side. But anyways, back to what Peterson just said. But what Jung just said. Responsibility. The problem of when we become possessed by either a belief system or religion or an ideology for your nationality, for your country, for whatever, is that you're letting other people choose for you. You're letting other people's minds control you. This is another reason why I stay as much in the middle as I possibly can. Like, there's some things I pick a side on. I'm not going to pretend like I don't. But there's people that like to say stuff like anybody who doesn't pick a side just because they're a pussy too scared to pick a side. It's like, that's not it. I'd rather not have the whole right side or the whole left side or the whole Republican or the whole liberal, the Democratic Party, or all of Catholicism or all of Satanism or all of Wicca or all of the shamanisms. I don't want any group to choose what I am or am not allowed to think, because just because they have opinions and ideologies, and you know, someone like anybody, it could be T-Wiz, who I like to talk about a lot, or anybody has opinions on how I should live my life based on how his life goes. Now, is his life the same as mine? No. I'm married with 4 kids. I'm 34 years old. He's not married. He doesn't have any kids. He's in a whole other country. He's a single man, and he's almost 60. So there's some grave differences there. So why should he dictate how I rule my life? I have my own personal responsibility. Now, if I'm possessed by an ideology and he sees that, or possessed by a belief system and he thinks he sees that, then that's different. Then he can point that out and tell me that's not going to serve me. And that makes damn sense. And I've seen him do that with people. I've seen him try to do that with me when I was talking about the one thing on his channel. I've seen that happen. And that's why I say not everything he says is horseshit or bullshit. It's only when he starts talking about something he doesn't actually practice or know about firsthand that it's like, why would you talk about something you don't know about? You know, talk about the things you know about. You know a lot, talk about those things. Don't talk about shit you don't know about, because then you're just guessing. But point is, personal responsibility. What happens if you are following an ideology? Everybody's mind, what everybody thinks, you have to, you know what I mean? You're a slave to the thoughts of that. And, you know, I don't know what would be Marxism or the communism. When Stalin was in power, there was people for and against that. The people against that were the first to get rounded up in the concentration camps. But once they were all gone, and it was like, yes, we were for the right side, we won. All our friends and family and everybody else who didn't believe with us, they're in those concentration camps. Well, then what happened? Well, those people got rounded up too. And you put that in perspective today with the Democrats versus the Republicans. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, or it's even close to that. But point is, let's say all the Republicans got rounded up and put into jail for the things they said and done while Trump was in power, let's just say. And all the Democrats are sitting there like, yeah, they finally got theirs, good for them, blah, 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 blah. But then all of a sudden, the Democrats got rounded up. I don't know what the reason would be. And like I said, this is just a metaphor and example. I'm not saying either one of those are going to happen. I'm not even picking one of those sides. The point is, this is what happened in Russia under the Soviet Union whenever they were doing communism. That it would be the today's version of that. So you'd be watching all the Republicans that you're against saying, finally, you know, they said a lot of hate, you know, whatever. I was on the right team. And then all of a sudden you get rounded up too, because they wanted everybody in concentration camps at that point. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening in the U.S. government. I'm just trying to use an example. That happened. That happened slightly after the Second World War, whenever we were going through the Cold War. This is what was happening. This is what the Gulag Archipelago book by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. His book is the confession of being an officer in a concentration camp at the Gulag, which was the name of the concentration camp. This is what happened. The people that were for communists also got rounded up. So there was two initial parties. They were divided right in half, just like the United States is right now. And then both parties got put in these concentration camps. And a lot of people died. And this is why having an ideology, and now I'm not saying being in the middle, me not picking one of those sides would save me. Obviously, they wanted to round everybody up, so everybody be rounded up. So I'm not saying it's going to save me. But at the same sense, it's not like picking a fucking choice, picking a side can save you either. I'm here in Canada where I don't have to worry about that shit. Thank God for that. Or thank the gods for that. But the point is, this is one of the reasons I stay in the middle, because I don't want groupthink. I don't want to be possessed by those ideologies. I don't want to turn on the TV to see what everybody's thinking, what just happened, ooh, what am I for and against, who can I look to fight. It's like, that's not my life. My life is my personal responsibility. I'm responsible for my children's lives because they're minors, and I'm not responsible for my wife's life, but I'm responsible for half of my responsibilities that we both share. And part of that is doing the system that I do to make sure that on top of the money I take in with my job, I have extra money to always provide. And I can still do my transformation at the same time. And according to Jung, this is what happens. This is what people need to understand. So if you are going to get rid of your ideology and get rid of your belief system, well, one of the things you cannot get rid of is personal responsibility. Because one of the things that come along with something like Catholicism, like Christianity, like the Judeo-Christian views, is the Ten Commandments. The reason to not go around and do crimes. Now, say what you want about those, but people that believe in those things, it stops them out of fear from going to heaven or hell, but it still stops them from doing some damaging things to themselves and others. And if you're nihilistic, then there's no reason to not do those things. If you stop believing in God and Christianity because it's a bullshit, but you haven't found a religion yet that seems true to you or whatever, well then there's personal responsibility kind of goes out the window. You can do whatever the fuck you want. There's no hell, there's no heaven, there's no afterlife, there's no penance, you probably don't believe in karma or cause and effect or any of that shit. That's why this is an important process to do properly with somebody. And the reason why I don't go out there and tell people this is just shoot away the Bible or believe in it completely. You gotta pick one or the other. It's like, no. You can believe in the Bible's stories as a way to teach you how to live and learn from past. These aren't necessarily factual stories, but they do explain what happens, They use the Godhead and God in those books to say what happens if you're not doing good. God's going to come down and start a fucking flood and start over. But that flood is not actually going to come from God. It's going to be your life falling fucking apart. If you're not doing things right, if you're not taking care of your family members, if you decide to say, fuck it, we'll just do whatever the fuck we want, there's no repercussions. Or get all nihilistic or get all, whatever the case is. Well, things are going to happen. And you're not going to know why they're happening, so you're going to blame it on, okay, there must be a God because he fucking hates me and he's doing all this shit to me because, I thought there was no God and I was all nihilistic. It's like, well, no, we are creating this as we go. And we have these certain natural laws within us that if we violate these natural laws, there's consequences to that. And that's what people should be teaching. But anyways, let's keep going and see what else he has to say.
Alright, sorry, just a fast correction. The Gulag Archipelago didn't happen during the Cold War. I was way off. It's the 1930s. He talks about Stalin here, probably in a little bit or towards the end, but it was more like the 1930s, so it was actually before the World War happened. But anyways, so if you want to know more, read the book. I read the book, but I'm getting the time frames wrong, so I'm not going to quote it right now. Maybe I can look it up fast and let you know, but I just wanted to correct that. It wasn't during the space race or the Cold War.
Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago published it in the early 1970s, and there were two things that made that book very striking. One was the stories that he told were so unbelievably powerful that you couldn't read them and not believe it was true. And that was even the case if you were a devoted Marxist. And at that time, in the universities, and in many ways it hasn't changed that much, the universities in the West were dominated by Marxists. And to some degree that was ethically inexcusable, because people had known since the 1950s, especially since George Orwell wrote, people had known since the 1950s that the Stalinist state was murderous beyond belief. So Stalin, for example, killed 6 million Ukrainians in the 1930s. He starved them to death. Because all of the farmers had been collectivized at that point. And what that meant was all the good farmers had been killed, and all the resentful farmers had been given the land, and then they collectivized the farms, and then Stalin took all the food to feed the cities. or to starve the Ukrainians, depending on how you look at it. And the edicts were so harsh that if you were Ukrainian and you had a family and they were starving and you went into a field after it had been harvested and you picked out individual grains from the dirt to gather in a bowl to feed your family, if you got caught, then they would shoot you. Solzhenitsyn observed this, and he was very interested in how this system developed. And his conclusion, after decades of thinking, was that the reason the Russian system was able to maintain itself fundamentally was because individuals were willing to give up the responsibility of their own relationship to the truth, to the state, and constantly lie to themselves about everything. And that if the individuals that composed the state had refused to accept things that they knew full well to be untrue, that the state wouldn't have been able to survive. And, you know, Solzhenitsyn's case is very strong because in some sense, he was the first person who told the truth about the Gulag Archipelago, which was this chain of prison camps that the Soviets had erected on which their economy was essentially based. He was the first person who really told the truth about that. And he hit the foundations of Marxist theory so hard that, well, partly it collapsed and partly it went underground into movements like postmodernism. So his proposition, it's a Dostoevskian proposition actually, that one person who stopped lying could overturn a tyranny. It's a hard thing to believe, but there's been multiple examples of that sort of thing in the 20th century. It happened with Gandhi. It happened with Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia. It happened with Nelson Mandela. It happened with Solzhenitsyn. You know, so those are pretty powerful examples of the power of a single individual who refuses to accept the conventional lie. Dostoevsky was writing about the same time as Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky is a very interesting person. He was an Orthodox Christian, although he's a very intelligent man. And
I like what he said there. Not just everything about Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag and all that, but how one person who decides not to lie, who tells the truth, can change the world. And he gives all those powerful examples, which is absolutely true. So if you're out there trying to push conspiracies that you don't know are true or not, you might want to think about stop doing that. If you're out there, promoting something that, is or isn't true, or you're just trying to get hits or whatever the case is, you might want to stop. You might want to think about, telling the truth, because the world is a better place. Sometimes I'd rather a fucking harsh truth than a fucking, a nice pretty lie. I think most people rather that and appreciate that. I was called a breath of fresh air by somebody not that long ago because of my style and the way I present things, and maybe sometimes I'm a little rough around the edges, or I let my emotions get the best of me when I'm talking, which isn't always a good thing, but I do try to always tell the truth and never lie about whether it's manifestations or what I've done, and if I have exaggerated, I try to recant it and tell you and go back, because it's a way better society if everybody takes on that responsibility of telling the truth. And quite frankly, we need more of that. It's part of our personal responsibility, to tell our truth. And, the thing he said about the society, what Solzhenitsyn said, if everybody wouldn't have went along with the lie, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't completely their fault. They all just lost their religious belief systems, realizing that there was no God above them, no salvation for when they're done. So maybe they weren't living great lives, and the only thing they were holding on to was the fact that they're going to heaven when they die, and that gets ripped away from them with nothing to substitute it with. And then all of a sudden comes along this idea, and then they follow that through, and then that just kicks them in the dick too, or in the fucking box, or ends up being shitty. But they rather go along with that because it's easier, and it's something to hold on to, it's something to believe in. So people are more likely to believe in anything you tell them if they lose their belief in God. I think we see a lot of that present today. A lot of people believe in a lot of crazy ideas just because, in the truth communities and the conspiracies and all that, there's a lot of stuff that are denouncing. And I'm not here to say Christianity is real or not real. I think the stories are real, like a metaphysical real. I think that's why I took the time to make videos about how they come from an older tradition, to try to make it okay for people to be okay watching, listening to whether it's Peterson or their own version of somebody who's decoding the Bible in a metaphysical, spiritual way, because these stories are important to us. And if you have that belief, the subconscious belief in your head about the Bible, well, then your conscious mind can believe in it or not believe in it. As long as you're on the same page, you can still manifest things. But whenever your conscious mind is against your subconscious mind, they're going to buck each other every time, and you're not going to be able to do shit. So it's good to get on the same page. Anyways, and not go too much longer. I'm going to see what he finishes off here with saying, and we'll go from there.
Dostoevsky is a very interesting person. He was an Orthodox Christian, although he's a very intelligent man. And Dostoevsky and Nietzsche are twins in some sense. So what Nietzsche wrote in philosophy, Dostoevsky wrote in literature. And one of Dostoevsky's primary statements was that if there's no God, everything is permitted. So it's a take on Nietzsche's discussion of nihilism. It's like, well, if there's no ultimate value of any sort, then why can't you do exactly what you want? And that's a theme he explores to great purpose in Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky's conclusion was that the reason you can't do anything you want is because you actually come equipped with an inherent set of values that are real, and that if you violate them to too great a degree, you'll destroy your own structure, as well as damaging the society that's around you. So Dostoevsky was a big believer, in some sense like the Jungians and the Rogerians, that there are the locus of values within a human being, and that it's an actual thing. You can't disregard it without damage. Dostoevsky was also a very powerful critic of reason, and the reason for that was it was reason in some sense that brought down the house of cards, so to speak, that constituted classical faiths. But the consequence of that rational destruction of values was the emergence of nihilism or totalitarianism. And the consequence of those two things is either the inability to live or the emergence of the murderous state. So Dostoevsky looked at that and thought, okay, well, perhaps our belief that reason itself is the proper guide to reality is wrong. And so this is one of the things he wrote in Notes from Underground when he was exploring this idea. Notes from Underground, by the way, it's a very short book, and it's very much worth reading. Dostoevsky wrote 5 books that are incalculably great. And what happened to Dostoevsky, I don't remember if I told you this or not, but he was a student radical, and he was arrested by the Tsar's men because of a riot or a protest that him and his compatriots had come up with. He was sort of a bit player in it, but they put him in prison when he was a young man. And then he was in prison for quite a while, and then one day they took him out into the courtyard and they shot him at dawn. You know, they had the soldiers line up and put him by a post and shot him. But they used blanks. But he didn't know that. And it scared him so bad he had epileptic seizure. And then he had epileptic seizures for the rest of his life. And the kind of epileptic seizures he had were associated with mystical experience. So Dostoevsky, before he got a seizure, would have this sense that he was experiencing the world in a more and more meaningful way until he was on the very dawn of sort of omniscient knowledge, and then he'd have a seizure. But it wasn't until he was shot with blanks and then put in this terrible prison for a long period of time and had epilepsy that he became a great novelist. It changed him in some way. His early writings are really, they're not good. They're sterile and dry. And his later writings, the 5 great novels in particular, they're in a class of their own. So Dostoevsky, the first thing Dostoevsky tried to come to grips with was the fact he didn't believe that life itself was rational.
All right, I don't know how much more I'm going to go. This last point about Dostoevsky, I just wanted to point out he was put in a jail and he was shot at with blanks, but he didn't know that and started getting seizures out of that. And, Thunder Wizard and many other people, even Peterson here, would talk about the shaman. If you go to his earlier teachings in the same series that I'm watching now, but there's one that's called the Shamanic and Heroic Path. They'll talk about shamans of the villages and stuff like that. They normally went through a near-death experience, and then from there, whatever. So it's kind of cool that Dostoevsky, not cool that he went through that or anything like that. That's pretty horrible. But the fact that after that he got this profound knowledge through these seizures and all that before that. And I did a whole podcast, I think, on Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard before. And the part about Dostoevsky I like is probably going to be coming up, and it's probably the last thing I'll play because I'm getting off of the point of the whole God thing here. But it kind of fits into it though too. That, you know, the part I played before was how he talks about give man cakes and let him busy himself with the continuing the species, which means like give him all the cakes he wants, all the money he wants, and let him have all the bitches he wants, and he'd be bored. And I made the point that if you got everything you ever wanted, everything you want right now, you made a list, 10, 50, 1,000 things, you got them all, you'd be bored. Because it's in the search of getting the things that you get the dopamine release and all that. Like I already went through that, right? So it's in obtaining your goals where we find the happiness. But this also proves the point that, you know, people, anyways, it's just something I wanted to point out real fast. But yeah, so I'll let that part play just so you can hear it, and then I'll probably go on to the conclusion of this video. I think I made quite a bit of points already that are pretty well thought out, but I might need to go back to my earlier ones just to, you know, really dig deep and just prove that it's okay to have your belief systems already. You just need to examine them, okay? Because understanding consciously that, you know, believing in God, that spirit, that guy in the sky, you know, who's going to dish out the heaven or the hell for you and the punishment to everybody, you know, it's not something you can really scientifically prove or consciously. You have a hard time believing in it now. So it's going to create this bullshit inside of you. But you don't need to do that. It doesn't have to be that complicated. And this is why I look at, like I said, look at other mythologies that relate to these stories. And I can see the comparisons between Christianity and the Greek myth and the Jewish myth and sometimes even the Gnostic stuff and then the Norse stuff. From there, I have a bigger, I don't know, I guess information library fucking, you know, to go back into and realize that all throughout history, men and women have made up these stories to explain what happens, and that's what they're used for, is to teach. So this way my conscious mind's on board, my subconscious mind, whatever it's got in there, it doesn't matter. As long as they're both linked up and on the same page, then you can use your power to your benefit. Because I'm telling you right now, it's happening whether you know it or not. You are manifesting your circumstances right now. Everything that's going on in your life is happening because of the programming earlier on, the things you were saying and doing, and the thoughts that you're accepting without knowing you're accepting them, and all that, and the ones you're banishing without knowing you're banishing them. That's what's happening for you. So your best bet is to start taking control of that through the simple practices I teach on here and point you to the people that taught me them. That's your best bet. Anyways, this might even be the conclusion. I don't know. That was pretty good. So, but yeah, let's finish up now.
That's an enlightenment proposition, that the structure of reality is in and of itself rational, so it can be dealt with by rational means. And that's been a very powerful theory because it's enabled us to develop this scientific viewpoint and the technology that goes along with it. But rationality is not the only mode of human knowing. There's all sorts of other modes of human knowing, and many of them, those are associated with emotion and motivation. They're more biologically instantiated, say, and less computational. And rationality has a very difficult time even conceptualizing how those other modes of knowing might be real, and so what it tends to do is denigrate them as mere opponents to rationality. But the Dostoevskian perspective, and this is also something that Rogers followed up on, and Jung, was that life itself is so irrational, or experience itself is so irrational, given its suffering and its absurdity, that a merely rationally formulated representation of life is insufficient. It can't manage the job. And what rationality will therefore do is cut away everything from life, cut away everything from its definition of reality that it can't actually encapsulate. Dostoevsky said, "In short, one may say anything about the history of the world, anything that might enter the most disordered imagination. The only thing one can't say is that it's rational. The very word sticks in one's throat." And indeed, this is the odd thing that is continually happening. There are continually turning up in life moral and rational persons, sages and lovers of humanity, who make it their object to live all their lives as morally and rationally as possible, to be, so to speak, a light to their neighbors simply in order to show them that it is possible to live morally and rationally in this world. And yet, we all know that these very people sooner or later have been false to themselves. So that's a precursor of Freudian ideas. Playing some queer trick, often a most unseemly one. Now I ask you, what can be expected of man, since he is a being endowed with such strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing. Drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, so that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of the species. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude and spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes, and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense his fatal fantastic element.
Alright, so yeah, now you just heard the whole cake thing and all that. But like I said, I already kind of spoke on that, and I made a whole episode about that, which is true, you know. And that's the thing with people, right? With COVID happening right now, everybody, you know, a little bit bored at home, a little bit on edge, nervous. There's a lot of emotions flaring, a lot of time to think, a lot of time to worry. You know, people worried as it was whenever they were busy and working and everything was going the way it was. Now there's like extra worry out there, so making thought forms that we don't even know we're making, and it's just a crazy world out there. And you know, once again, you can give everybody what they want, and that's also been proven. Like, there's a lot of people in my town that were on the system, and they were taking the extra money from the government, and they have their check coming in, and this extra money they were buying fucking TVs, video games, a bunch of drugs, and you know, some of them had to go to rehab because they were overdoing it and they got so depressed. Some of them died, some of them commit suicide, some of them overdosed. You know what I mean? Giving everybody what they want is not gonna solve anything. Just like giving the poor a bunch of money, it's not gonna solve anything. Now, I'd love to get rid of the poverty in the world and all that, and there's some people that are poor and you know, they deserve a chance and all that, and they'll probably do good with it. But there's a lot of people out there, the more money they give them, the more they're gonna self-destruct. That's not what this was about. This video was about the fact that we as spiritual people, whether you are getting rid of your programming or you're deciding to keep that programming there but seeing it from a different light, you still have to take up your personal responsibility. You can't put it on this Godhead anymore. It's on you. You are the one responsible for your life. That's one of the main things you need to understand. The other one is, if you want to get rid of your belief systems, that's okay. Maybe you're being instructed to, and maybe you can do it safely. But you need something else to fall back on, an older tradition, something that explains the past, something that grounds you into this realm. And if you want me to elaborate more on that, if I didn't get it for you in this video on exactly what I mean by that, send me a comment, send me an email, send me something, and I'll elaborate more on that. But it's already an hour and some, so I think that's enough for today. But just heed that information and let that sink in. You know, let me know what you think. And you know, as for the comment I started off with, yeah, send me your testimonial, bro. I'll send me not your testimonial, but your story about how you left the church, and you know, I'll spend that any way you want. And once again, this video wasn't because of that comment or anything. It was about something completely different. But leaving the church and getting rid of your programming are two separate things. Just because you left the church doesn't mean you're not still programmed by it. Once again, I still have religious programming in me, but I use it to my benefit. And I don't care what all the gurus say out there. I know it works, because there's one guru that I trust above all else, Frederick Xavier, and he teaches how to do that as well. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Have yourselves a great fucking night.